Thank you and welcome. So it's an intimate group this morning, and what the plan is, I'm going to give an extremely brief overview of the existing model of ProSocial and the bits that I like, and that maybe a bit that I don't quite get. I might. So it's very personal, in other words, and then we'll do a round, inviting you also to possibly give a reflection on that. Do we want to turn off check in? Yeah. Let's. If do you want to check in, Paul?
I do kind of feel the need to just kind of get ourselves together as a group before we
Yeah.
dive into it.
Okay.
Is that
Let's
okay?
turn it off. Welcome, friends. So today I'm going to start the session by giving a very brief overview of the existing pro-social model, the components, and what I like about them, and one bit that perplexes me. Then I'm going to hand to Paul, who's going to update us on some additions and refinements to the model that are being developed currently. And it'll be a good chance to give feedback both on the existing and also on the proposed. So I'm actually going to read a description of the existing model from a document Paul wrote just to start officially, and then I'll go off on my own tack. So the pro-social model as it is was not intended to be a linear sequence. It usually began with building psychological flexibility and communication skills, whilst also clarifying and sharing individual interests, initially using the personal act matrix. Typically, we then invited a group to find a stronger sense of shared purpose using the collective act matrix tool. We then used discussion and tools like the core design principles survey or the spoke diagram to explore Ostrom's core design principles for ways to improve the group. Finally, we would use traditional group goal setting techniques to prioritise and implement actions. So that is the overview of the existing model. Now I'm going to just look at each part, give it my own description and response to each part, and then we'll do a round. Listening went off camera. Oh, yeah, good. So the psychological flexibility part of the model sort of gives an opportunity to the individual act matrix to express individual authenticity and vitality. And I think that's incredibly important, even when individuals are part of a group, because it's that vitality that gives the variations and the courageous suggestion making. We don't want the group think thing. We don't want, dominant people dominating the group. So the ability of both individuals and groups to move towards a valued goal is in the presence of, say, a wish to avoid difficult topics or a wish to avoid difficult people, is what psychological flexibility allows us to do. So the tools, the personal act matrix and the collective act matrix, were typically used to ask what matters most to us about shared purpose in the first instance. That was often a typical question. And of course, the collective matrix later could ask about how we might implement certain core design principles. Now, what I like about the psychological flexibility and the use of the matrix is the way that sharing as individuals particularly and in a group, it exposes our vulnerabilities and that builds trust. It's a really good way of getting to know each other and a way of normalising our concerns, our fears. It's very well-grounded science based both in Western science and, sorry, Paul, the teachings of the Buddha. Anyway, the matrix maps a moment in time. So that's a really important thing to note, that the matrix only maps a moment in time, and it can be done on a piece of paper or it can be done in your head. And it's basically, you know, a mindful awareness practice as taught in Buddhist teachings as well. Okay, now the other thing we did typically next was listening and reflecting skills practice. And people tend to love being listened to and being heard and understood. And you could almost see the tension drop from their shoulders. So it creates not only trust, but I think motivation, because people feel I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm valued. The typically next part was looking at the design principles developed by Lynn Ostrom. And the implementation of these principles establishes group norms which support variation, selection, and retention to bring in that cultural evolution terminology. In practice, the principles are implemented in a range of different contexts. So implementation methods will be widely varied and widely effective. It's very important to do the principles 4 and 5, which is the clear, transparent record keeping and the sort of tracking and reviewing, because that basically also supports the cultural evolution. So what I like is that the principles are a set of holistic principles that work as a system together, and they help the team to achieve their objectives, and they protect the group against external interference. The last one before I hand over to the round is if you remember on a slide, I couldn't find it this morning, there's a temple. It's got 2 pillars. It's got a triangular hat and it's got a plinth on the base. And the plinth on the base is cultural evolution science. The 2 pillars are the psychological flexibility and communication, and the other one, the Ostrom design principles, holding up the roof of the world that works for all. Oh, thank you, Paul. There it is, our little temple slide, as it is affectionately known. There we are. Thank you. So that basically is a snapshot of the existing model, dare I say, the famous temple slide. Thanks, Paul. So the cultural evolution piece, I just have a quick rant about this. I'm completely off script, and I am not a scholar. I haven't even attended the Evo Science groups, so I'm fully putting it out there that I'm a learner, and I just have been reflecting, though, because Paul has reflected that some people say, well, look, cultural evolution just happens by itself in whatever good or bad direction evolution happens, sort of thing. So, you know, ProSocial science does attempt to make sure that cultural evolution happens in a positive direction for humanity, for a world that works for all. But I'd just like to say, this is my reflection, that what I'm seeing is that the dominant cultural evolution at the moment is the dominance of the mind at the expense of the whole thinking, feeling person, and also a attitude of using technology to dominate nature. Now, I understand that was necessary when we were frightened little beings living in caves. We had to use our mind and technology, bows and arrows, bridges, you know, to survive, to ensure our survival. But now we seem to still be operating that way, and we're gonna become extinct, I reckon, because like this, not only are we using technology, and the obsession with problem solving, and it's rewarded. It's, you know, it is rewarded in our culture. So I'll just say the societal culture is dominated by outputs of thought rather than holistic sensing and responding. The dominant thought that is selected for is related to dominating and extracting from the natural world and even trying to replace it with technological solutions. The repetition of this activity requires a hoarding of resources at the expense of the commons as to be able to further this activity. So, of course, we are also seeing, on the other hand, a regrowth of grassroots, non-extractive, non-hoarding activity like ProSocial in order to share, collaborate, and honour the natural world, including a return to respecting Indigenous traditions. But that's where I don't buy that we are actually on the winning side of cultural evolution, and I'm just putting it out there. So, don't know if that was helpful, but it'd be nice to hear from people what they like about the existing model. So I'll just remind you of the components you may wish to comment on: psychological flexibility, listening and reflecting practice, the principles which allow for implementation in a group, so the design principles, and finally, cultural evolution science. So I'm going to invite anyone to comment on those components.
Pep,
Yes, Rachel.
I have a question. It's interesting. It's interesting that you said that the matrix is only a moment in time at that moment, and I'm curious. I haven't thought about it that way before, and so I appreciate that perspective because I think that it lightens it a little bit. But I'm curious. I'm wondering if the reason I haven't thought about it that way is because I'm having people name using a value sheet when I do the matrix. Like I have them choose actual values that are what's important to them, and then have them talk about the thoughts and feelings that would move them away from doing that value. So I'm wondering if it's because I do it a little bit, I'm doing it differently than what's the shared interest of the group. Because yeah, I don't know. I'm just, I think that there's different purposes for the pro-social matrix at different times, depending on what your goal is with the group. So yeah.
Yes, I'd agree with that. You can put different questions to the group, can't you? And they get mapped. And it's that point in time, it comprises the people who are there, their particular take on it at that particular, in that context. The matrix is contextual. I think why I love that is it makes it very alive, and also invites you to constantly revisit it.
Then and I agree, now that I think about it this way as a point in time, I think my personal goal has been to have it be something, that shared interest, that they can just kind of keep coming back to this framework of, are we moving towards it or away from it? If it is something that you keep revisiting, how do you keep the group cohesion around the shared interest if it's always a bit of a moving target?
Well, I'll have a go, and then I probably should. I'm aware I've got the expert, so I should hand it over. But hey, I'll have a go. That, like the shared values, they're likely to be quite stable, and perhaps if you're doing the core design principle where you've got shared purpose and identity, the what we used to call the top right-hand side, but the one where you establish what's important to you, the values, needs, etc., that could be quite stable. It's just that the matrix can be used to map a lot of different things. So, you know, there might be a different question. The question might be, how will we implement decisions, or what's important to us about how we make decisions. And what you capture under values and needs are likely to be fairly stable. Probably that one quadrant would be the most stable of all, I would guess, but the others would be highly likely to be variable. I am going to hand over to the expert now.
No, thank you for explaining that part.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I'm the expert. It's really interesting just to hold up our own process here too. Yeah, anyway. I'm feeling uncomfortable about the currents of expertise, but I guess we've all got different perspectives. Pippa, I basically agree with everything you just said. I think some things are more stable. One of the things that establishes whether or not it's stable is the nature of the question, I think. Like if you're saying, let's say in Pip's context, she's working with her community. We're saying something like, what matters to us about being part of this community? That's kind of going to be pretty stable. But if we're saying what matters to us about how we respond to the council's demand that we install a water processing unit, that's very much evolving. And so I think all Pip was doing was pointing to the need for flexibility in terms of differing levels of stability around this. It's always in response to a moment in time, but then our entire life is a moment in time as well. So, you know, some moments in time last a bit longer than others, if that makes sense. I think, would you agree with all of that, Pip? Yeah.
Yes, because a moment in time might be us doing a behavior, but if we repeat that behavior, then it, it becomes a habit and a way of operating, which is relatively more enduring. Yes.
The thing, and this is going to get into sort of one of the things I reacted to about the collective matrix. I think there's a whole lot of stuff built into our language about what is your matrix. You know, it's almost like you can get away with asking that question. Show us your matrix, as though it's a thing that you have, that you carry around inside you or something like that. I wanted to get away from that. I really want to try and shift us to recognizing that life is continually unfolding. We're continually re-asking the question of what really matters to us here. And, you know, it doesn't mean that I really love your point, Rachel. Groups need something solid to hang on to. So shared identity cannot be redefined at every meeting. And that's absolutely true. Just as, you know, my identity can't. But I'm sort of hoping that we might get groups to a place where they can recognize that our identities can be multiple and dynamic, and including our shared identity.
I love, actually, I feel like all of a sudden part of my mind just like opened up, and while I know that the matrix can be used for more than just that, I think I've been so fixed on getting the groups to come together, right? And identifying these big rocks that get in their way. And so all of a sudden I feel like I now have 3 octaves of a piano when before I think I only was using one octave. So I appreciate that perspective and the reminder of the need for flexibility. And you can have the range. So yeah, Pip and Paul, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's nice.
Thank you. Cabot, would you like to respond to what you like about the existing model or what puzzles you?
Well, first I'd like to respond to what we've just been talking about, which is, so I've often used the matrix personally for myself. So as a snapshot in time, it's actually been kind of instructive, because if I come back to it a month or two later, I might be surprised, I might be embarrassed, I might be a number of different reactions. So that's sort of, I sort of like that snapshot in time perspective idea. I think it has its place, but I can also see stability. I'm curious, Pip, you said something like, we are not necessarily on the right side of history or something. It's not guaranteed, that just because we're doing pro-social practices, that I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on that. Yeah, I'm probably using the wrong words.
Okay, but this is a personal, relatively uninformed view, which I just wanted to share because, I think it's interesting to speak your truth, however uninformed it may be. I just feel that the dominant movement in cultural evolution at the moment in terms of variation and retention, variation, selection, retention is thought-based, technology-based, and money-based, and based on exploiting the natural resources. And it is absolutely rampant. Now, the fact that the environment is starting to push back and say, there's a limit and you're closely approaching it, is sad but hopeful, because the environment is speaking, is the only one speaking loud and clear to people who have enough money to try to replace nature. You don't need to give birth to babies, you just get them out of a test tube and you get the best qualities as defined by some male medical technologist by combining the DNA of three people, not one. So you get all this nonsense, doesn't matter if we burn up this planet, we'll go and burn up another one. Technology, at the moment, I just see a collision that is the way we're going, and the environment's going, that's not going to happen because I'm collapsing. So where does pro-social really come in? I feel hopeful, but I just would like to feel that, and I know that the grassroots movements are happening, to say, look, Indigenous cultures, they know how to live with the earth, to nurture it, to honour it. It's such a totally different mind shift, almost since, I would say, the beginning of Christianity, at least, when we had that in the Western culture, that fall from that break with nature, I think, is the symbolism of Eve eating the apple. She was divorced from nature, and our culture seems to have gone that way ever since. So can we turn it back around towards Indigenous wisdom or not? That's the question for me. Love to hear what anybody else thinks. It's not strictly pro-social, is it, Paul? And yet, isn't it as well?
It's about our
Love to hear what anybody else thinks.
Yeah, I guess my question was more, I guess I heard you I heard you wrong. I think I was thinking that you were saying pro-social practices are not a guarantee of anything, and which of course is probably true, but I'm always looking for things that will generally tend to work better, that will tend to take us in a good direction. Just
Yeah, I think
by
they're the
their
best hope
nature.
we've got, Habit, because look at the power when people get together as one, like say even the French Revolution, you know, when people get together as one, they do have that power to change history. So in a sense, I'm saying, but I just don't know, because pro-social collaboration is a somewhat gentle approach, a collaborative approach. It is very gaining ground at the grassroots. Just interested whether it's a match for the vested interests. That's what I'm asking.
I think about this often, Pip. And it frightens me because I think when I look back on time or history or things, it just seems like the mightier, not the gentler, except for Gandhi, which I'm sure there's other things, but seems to win out. And right now, you know, with ChatGPT and AI, I just was looking up the effect of using ChatGPT on the environment is huge. The amount of carbon that it takes to run a server that does ChatGPT is like running a car for a whole entire year straight. And so maybe that's not a lot, but it feels like a lot. And I just feel like we can work to get people to collaborate. But behavior change and thought change and collaboration has never been the human strength unless we're in deep crisis. So maybe it will come in to be useful because we are going towards deep crisis. But I think it's a real balancing act, and greed usually wins out. I mean, this is what all the Marvel movies are about, right? What all of the science fiction is all about. But I try to stay more positive, but it is awfully daunting.
Paul, I'd like to hand the rest of the meeting over to you, either to continue this conversation or to introduce the new things, because we've just got half an hour left and that was the plan. So I'm handing over to you to facilitate.
What feels most alive to me right now is this question. It's about it. It is. I mean, this question of how do we orient to the quite high likelihood that there'll be catastrophe and breakdown in many, many ways. Feels to be the question, and it's a live question that sort of sits almost unspoken underneath ProSocial. For many years in the training, I did this 2 worlds exercise, and I just invited people to imagine a world of selfishness and disconnection and domination. For me, that actually Mickey Cashton puts it so beautifully. She focuses on domination, separation, and scarcity, or something like that. And those 3 to me are just the core of it. Like, what's it like to live in that world? What's it like to live in a more connected world? And could we possibly bridge between the 2 of them? And one of the most heartening pieces of pro-social training for me has been when people have said, it's given me hope. So I think it's right at the core of what we do, that we find a place to stand in relationship to despair and discouragement, and find a place to stand that involves hope. So if others are interested, I'm happy to just follow the energy and postpone a more sort of detailed conversation of the processes and stay with this question for a little while, just for each of us as human beings. What does the group? I'd love to get some response as to where your energy is for the rest of this conversation.
I'm kind of interested in the change, the additions or changes that you come up with. And I of course do like this conversation as well, because it's something I think that yeah, it's an undercurrent all the time.
So you could go either way. Is that what you're saying, Rachel?
I think I'm leaning more towards the new, hearing what you originally had planned.
Cool. Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I would say I'm actually kind of really interested to hear what you have planned.
I'm glad I asked that. Delia?
Thank you for naming the undercurrent. I think it's always a good. It drops us in another place, and I'm really looking forward to hearing these updates as well.
Okay. And Pip?
Yes, the same.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we can. Actually, all right. There is going to be an experienced ProSocial course called ProSocial for Regenerating Earth with Joe Brewer, who's going to be the primary lead on that. So maybe some of these topics will come up again. I think hope and despair and finding a place to stand is really key. I'll just say that the one thing that I found absolutely super helpful for this was Joanna Macy's idea of active hope, and what she means by that, with full awareness that the world is going to shit in many ways. She's still able to define a way of connecting with hope, which I found very, very useful. All right, so with that said, I shared with you in the chat line, oh, did I? Maybe I didn't. Let me just share with you a document that Robert Stiles and I are working on at the moment, sort of rethinking what I suppose is version 2 or 3 or 2.1 or something of ProSocial. And some of the things that I mentioned at the bottom of page 1 there, I actually love all the things that Pip mentioned, including the links to Buddhism. So I was confused by that comment, but we could talk about that later. So I love, well, I really like the emphasis. I feel like we had something unique, and we have something unique in thinking about individual, what I call interests. I know it's a very dry word, but it's meant to capture passions and loves and everything that matters to us, individual interests and collective interests, and trying to weave those together. Something about that idea was really good. And also, it felt to me as though the collective matrix was not well situated. It didn't have, the collective matrix asked in the way of sort of what matters to the group is tantamount to basically saying, what's our shared purpose? And then kind of trying to answer it. And I felt that people didn't have a way into that. So what I found myself doing just naturally was asking the miracle question, basically, which is, what would it look like if we got to, if in 5 years' time or 3 years' time or whatever, things were going really well? What would we notice? What would be happening? And then how do we get there is starting to articulate what the group's purpose is. So I felt like naturally we have to go back to vision first, and then establish a route to get to that vision, which becomes the shared purpose. So it's almost like shared purpose was something we were trying to do up the front of a process, when it actually emerges from the end of a process. Like, this is our purpose, we've discovered it together. And so that was one of the things I was noticing with groups. And I said last night to some group, I think I had about a 70% success rate with the collective matrix, which is better than 50-50, but it's not 100%. And I want a method that's really going to work in every engagement I engage with. And there were times where the collective matrix just kind of fell flat. People were like, yeah. And the other thing I felt when I was doing the collective matrix at that point in the process was people were just getting up ahead of steam of, shit, we're a group, we can get stuff done. And they were getting all excited about it. And then I'd say to them, and what holds you back from all of that? And it was like, they just go into this pit, you know, and it was like, and then I'd say to them, well, feel the feelings of being in the pit, you know, that's going to happen to you. And that's true, it is. And some groups that are very psychologically minded were kind of like, oh, that's great, I felt the feelings and we can still move forward. But other groups were like, oh, shit, what are we talking about this for when we want to, you know, get excited together? And so I wanted more flexibility around that. And at the same time, Robert Stiles has been doing a lot of amazing work on groups of groups. And I was looking at his work and I was sort of looking at it and thinking, that's tremendous for big groups of groups, but it's not really relevant to the sort of scale that we're going to have in small groups. And then when we got talking about it and started to dive into it really together, I mean, this has been a long process, but we've ended up at a place where we're co-writing this thing, which basically is, I see it as an incremental change. I don't see it as a complete transformation. But I'll share with you what, you know, one way to represent this in this document. So figure one is, you know, kind of the old process. There was some sort of process of exploring and clarifying individual interests, exploring and clarifying collective interests using the collective act matrix, using the CDPs to work out how we're going to work together, and then setting goals for action. Now, if you create an expanded view of that, and I'll just jump straight to it, you can think of it as, first of all, we really both wanted to get away from the idea that ProSocial is the act matrix and the CDP survey, right? ProSocial is so much more. I mean, look at, it's an evolutionary framework. It comes from the genesis of it. It comes from the ideas about how life has occurred, you know, and how it's continually evolving and changing. So ProSocial has to be big enough to contain many methods, not just one or two, many techniques. And so we tried to frame it up in terms of, well, what are the processes, the core processes, not techniques, but core processes that are involved in having a group move from being disconnected, involving domination and a sense of scarcity and competition, to finding connection, finding belonging, mutual contribution, inclusion, and so forth. What are the sort of key waypoints along that from a process point of view rather than from a technique point of view? And I always find it hard to describe the difference, but I'm just talking about the key sort of outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and there are many ways to achieve a core outcome. And I think if I start at the beginning, there's a sort of, I think of it as a kind of being a bit cute here by saying 5 Ps. I don't know if this is going to stick or be resonant with people, but there's a preparation phase with a group where I think of it as like preparing a garden. You're tilling the soil for change to occur. What do you need to do to create the conditions whereby there's a fertile ground for change to occur? And we didn't used to talk about this bit so much, but anybody who's an experienced facilitator will know that you have to talk to managers about, you know, what we're going to do. You have to get, if you're in an organizational context, you need to get buy-in for that. You need to get resourcing for it. You need to maybe coach some of the people that might be involved as co-facilitators. There's a whole lot of preparation work that's going to need to take place to provide a fertile outer context, if you like. And then if you like, and maybe I'm being a bit cute here, we might move it around. I think that this bit is not just about finding individual interests, because as Pip said, like a big bit of what we were doing was listening skills, for example. And I think from the how are we doing for time? We've only got 7 minutes. So I think from a skills point of view, we were also trying to use the matrix to build psychological flexibility skills, which are, this is one thing I believe about ProSocial. Bringing psychological flexibility to groups is transformative, even leaving aside anything else. We lost a bit of that when people saw PsychFlex as the matrix. Like, people thought, oh, if I do this box, then I've done the PsychFlex bit. No, the PsychFlex is a continual practice in life. It's a continual returning to, like meditation, returning again and again and again to how this moment's showing up and the way that language is structuring it for us. By the way, this is relevant to the question of how do we show up to the moment of despair, or show up to the moment of maybe we're not strong enough to overcome the forces that are arrayed against us. So this developing awareness, personal values, clarity around what really matters to me, and communication skills, perspective taking skills, and so forth, I think is something that we, there are other methods. DNAB is one ACT framework that's being used a lot now in ProSocial, particularly by Jim Lemon. But just generally, there's a lot, as Rachel could attest to, the whole sum total of ACT has so many techniques for building and sharing psychological flexibility that we could be using. The piece of the one bit of the collective matrix that was really helpful in this kind of second position was the miracle question, or when I framed up the top right question, quadrant. Oftentimes the group would get a lot of value from just saying what really matters to us, and framing it up as a vision. What would it look like if things were going really well? The community mapping, we didn't previously do stakeholder analysis, although Robert and we talked about it many, many times, and it's definitely something that I've done a lot of. So it's there, but we just didn't have it as part of the formal process. But of course, if we're building a group and we're going to be talking about CDP 7 and 8, we need to be talking about stakeholders in the network in some way or other. I should say, all of this is going to end up looking like it's a hugely complicated model, and it kind of is, as we're discovering in the teaching of the leading ProSocial program. This is not easy for people to get the wholeness of this model. But I'm going to say there's a simplicity on the other side of this complexity. And so just bear with me, and I'll get to that within the next 4 minutes. By the way, can we go on just a little bit longer beyond? Oh, have we got? I think yeah, we've got until 1/4 past the hour. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? That one. I just showed my calendar to the world. Okay. High security. All right. So building a sense of what is it we long for? What are we yearning for? And doing that not just in the head, but in the heart as well, with exercises like the Journey to the Future exercise that Robert's brought into the fold, which is such a beautiful, beautiful exercise. Then another key bit, I think that, sort of, it seems obvious to me now, and I'm enormously grateful to Robert for bringing it back in a way that was really clear to me, is, a key part of behavioural thinking is that behaviour is functional. We do it for a reason. What are we trying to achieve here? What am I trying to achieve in this moment? I'm trying to achieve connection to you all remotely, and also information sharing, something that'd be useful, you know, like in this moment, I'm trying, and if you come back to me and say, sorry, that wasn't very helpful, I won't do this again, right? That's the nature of reinforcement processes, that we do things that work, we keep on doing things that work, we stop doing things that don't work. More or less, I mean, if we're an animal, that we just do that. But if we're linguistic beings, we sometimes get rigid because we start to believe that, you know, I'm the kind of person who does X, and we stick to doing stuff that doesn't work. So it's not always the case. But generally speaking, we do stuff that works, whether it's in the short term or the long term. And so thinking about at the group level, what are the group level contingencies? What is, Robert likes to use the term, what has this group acting, I think he says, or what has this group behaving, or what's pushing this group around? You know, what is it that's got this, what is it that has this group performing? Which is a beautiful question, because it's about, you know, the trends and the drivers in the external environment. So again, just as this preparation phase had an outer and an inner component, I think that this prospecting for opportunities phase has an outer and an inner component. And the outer bit is looking at the systemic trends and drivers to identify opportunities for response. There's a whole raft of techniques that we've not used in ProSocial, like scenario planning, causal loop mapping, and you know, all sorts of mental models analysis, and trend analysis, and all sorts of things that we could be doing in this space. And the point of them all is not to try and map the system. We're not trying to do that, because you'll never do it. The point is to find levers for change, opportunities that are well suited, that might work when we get to this point. But that has an inner component as well. And a big part of what we need to do is to look at the way that we operate as a group. And that's where the core design principles are so beautiful. Let's look inwards at how we organize ourselves differently to respond to the environment. And so that is the core design principles. And we'll find a whole bunch of, this is where we might do the collective act matrix, because I have never, I think I've had 100% hit rate on using the collective act matrix for exploring questions like, how do we make decisions together? Or how do we make sure that there's fairness here? What do we mean by fairness? And you know, what shows up for us when we think about it? So exploring those sorts of questions with the collective act matrix is right on, because it's in a moment, it's a challenge that the group faces in the moment that they have real energy around. And then it's helpful to have the left-hand side. It's really helpful to see what's getting in the way for people, their fears and concerns. That carries valuable information, and it doesn't slow the group down. It just helps them get more energized. So having done that, out of that comes a lot of opportunities for change. And then there's a process of prioritizing what those opportunities are, the ones that we can most act on. Robert distilled that down to a couple of key questions, which I really think are important. You know, obviously, what's most important to us, what in terms of realizing the vision, what's going to have the most impact on the vision, on the movement toward the vision, but also what are we capable of? You know, what's our internal resources? What can we do? Because we need those two sides. We need the kind of driving forward of what really matters, and also the what can we do? What's ours to do? I love that question. Dunia has helped me with that one. You know, like, and I think about that a lot, Dunia. What's mine to do? You know, it's such a beautiful question. I don't have to do everything, and we don't have to do everything as a group. But what is ours to do, and what are we capable of doing to move toward this vision? And then going into a phase of action research and evaluation. Now, I have a version of this that has feedback loops and interconnecting lines between every box, but basically you can connect everything to everything, and it's a circular process. It's not a linear process, as this diagram would suggest. It is very much a circular process. And the other thing I want to say before I stop and get your feedback is that you're not going to do this whole thing with every group. But the simplicity on the other side of complexity that I wanted to point to is eventually ProSocial facilitators need to have access to all the capacity to do all these things, because they are all part of moving through change toward an improvement. But I, am working with a group at the moment where we started out kind of framing it up as a strategic planning initiative. What do you really want to happen, and starting to think about opportunities and so forth. But we've actually come back to, what this group just really wants to focus on building some psych flex skills and trying them out. So in that case, this one and this one. And that's going to be enough for now. It's this moment, that's meeting this moment. Other groups, you'll just get heaps of value from sharing the CDP survey and the spoke diagram, and then prioritizing some opportunities for action and trying them out. So these bits, don't have to do all of it, but it helps a lot to know that it's all there and that there's coherence in it. And for me, this brings more richness and depth and expands my repertoire, so that I can now facilitate things that I could not have facilitated with just the model of individual interests and collective interests and the CDPs. There you go. There's my little intro, and feel free to look at the process diagram. Love to hear your thoughts and commentary.
Well, I want to say I love how it's inclusive and in a way never ending. Like, it's going to be learning forever, right? Yeah, looks like there's always things to learn. It seems very inclusive of a lot of things that it kind of gives me more confidence in the model. Yeah.
Oh, I actually feel quite emotional in response to that coming from you, Cabot. That's wonderful. Because I have a sense of your discernment. So thank you.
Thank you.
I've been in the process of working, I told you, I think I mentioned it in this group, with the health department, working on suicide, overdose, and adverse childhood experiences. And I've been doing the ProSocial model with them, because it's not just the health department, it's all the agencies in my town that work on these issues. And the shared resource, of course, would be funding, right? And when I started working with them on the group matrix, some of them really stumbled. And so I like the ability in this new model to have a bit more flexibility, because Pip, I noticed that you said you add in active listening skills, and I add that in when, just because I'm like, they're not listening. Like with this group, many of them are changing that because they're all prevention specialists or therapists. And so I, kind of calling it. But my point being, Paul, is that I feel like this allows for the actual transformation process and for people to be less lost. And I truly believe that unless a group can own the process and develop the process themselves with me, Like I bring in pro-social concepts, but I don't ever come in and say, I'm going to do this pro-social thing for you. I'll say, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I think will help you. Is this of interest to you? And I feel like this model allows that because they also have to own it because they have to maintain it. We're not there as consultants every step of the way. Anyway, so yeah, I really appreciate this. And when you talk about needing to do different techniques, hey, Holly, want to plug in here? Take mine out and plug in there. It drops the Wi-Fi sometimes. Sorry, my goddaughter's here. But I find that sometimes they yeah, just get lost with this concept of a matrix, and I want them to choose. Anyway, I got a little lost in thought, but you know, I don't want to keep rambling. You know what I'm saying.
Rachel, I'll pick up where you left because you inspired me. And it revolves around that question, what's mine to do? Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate how there's a sense in which I hear through the meeting needs, what's the group's needs, and then what in this landscape of possibilities are the ones that are needed for this specific situation with this specific group, and the tailoring that comes from just meeting, understanding. So there's a sense in which the active listening has gone to the level of the model. It's like, okay, how are we orienting to what's needed here, more so than like this cookie cutter formula. It's more lots of very delicious ingredients and a fully equipped kitchen, and now we're learning how to listen so that we can pick up the kind of the music that's in the field, or like the meal that wants to nourish us, that's specifically for this moment. So I'm really thrilled with the development. And you said something around the mapping. It wasn't this idea of mapping the whole ecosystem, because that was just a ludicrous idea, or at least that's how I'm and I was like, yeah, absolutely. And you framed it as finding opportunities for change or levers, and I really, that resonated with me, this notion that just like we can see that there are problems everywhere, there's also like opportunities everywhere, and it's which ones are we orienting towards. So just lots of appreciation. But there's something here around still around meeting people where they're at, that is a thread that keeps on coming back for me, that I find that, I mean, it's happening fractally in many areas in pro-social world, and I'm wondering how it shows up here, because the way it's presented, it really was helpful for you to read, to present it, because I've seen the document, but the words just I don't absorb it the same way. So I know that we have some absorption engagement work.
Can I just maybe respond to that before Pip has a turn? Would that be okay? Judy, are you finished? Or complete, I should say. I think what you're pointing to is really key. Our big challenge now is how to present this in a way that doesn't overwhelm people. Because frankly, it is overwhelming. If you're a busy doctor and you want to improve your ward or your team, but you don't want to become a facilitator or learn a whole set of new skills. How are you going to relate to this? Well, you're probably going to switch off, quite frankly. So our challenge, and I think it's possible, and this is where collaborating with Dunia and others on the idea of a sort of group health clinic. Or Rachel, I think maybe you're in that as well. That is something I'm looking forward to. I'm also working on a set of, like, what would be just one question that you could ask to get it through each of these phases? If that's all you could do, just one question, like the miracle question, I think gets you through the vision phase. Then what would it be? You know, what is pushing your group to perform the way it is? Something might get you a contingency thing. So we can distill some of those and turn it into something like a canvas that people can move through relatively quickly is one other option, or a survey or something. But, you know, that's where I think maybe the facilitators community, us here in this room, and hopefully more people as they join us, could work on that together, because it's not something I'm going to come up with. It's going to work in every context. It's going to be an evolving thing that comes from all of us saying, you know, this is what would work in my context. So that's a thought. Oh, you've got to go? Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
No, I wanted to, so something that occurred to me during all this is, how do we, so with this huge universe of possible methods and skills, and each group being different, so what are the ways that reliably we can discern what it is that a group needs in terms of, you know, what are the group's needs, and what is it going to take to meet those needs? And so, Paul, maybe miracle questions are, you know, maybe that's one way of at least looking at that question. The other thing that occurs to me is that, okay, so if I'm a beginning ProSocial facilitator, and I'm not going to have every skill on the list. Probably nobody's going to have every skill, but so having access to other folks who do, that seems like it would be a really useful thing.
Thanks, Kurt. I'm going to just hold those questions together, or did you want a response now? I want Pip to have a chance to speak. So would it be okay if I just kind of held those questions, or would you like a response? Yeah.
No.
Thank you.
Well, what I wanted to say anyway is a response to Habit's question, really, because when I did my master's in organisational coaching, one of the major models was Prochaska's behaviour change model, and I will explain the model. It's very simple. It's basically some people and groups are in pre-contemplation stage. In other words, they haven't even thought about it. Others are in contemplation, so they're thinking about it. You know, it's on their radar, thinking like, oh my God, do I need to engage with this? What would it mean? Da, da, da. And then there's a readiness phase, like, okay, I'm ready to do something about this. And there's an implementation stage. Of course, then there's trial and error. So there'll be relapses in this model and reviews, you know, and then the action learning cycle goes again. But it just dawned on me why this is so relevant to ProSocial groups, because I'm currently undertaking, and maybe it's why I've been a bit gloomy, this travelling through this exploration of climate change impacts and people's responses. And to be honest, the course is moving us into action, pushing us. And I'm very much in contemplation, sometimes pre-contemplation. Like this is whoa, this is like whoa for me. So I think it is very good to think about the stages of change when we're working with a group and meeting them where they're at. Thank you.
Yeah, I do too. It's another piece of this sort of meta listening to the group that Dania was referring to.
It makes sense that it matches the stages of change, and that I remember Stephen Hayes talking about, I think when I first was introduced to ACT, I've been trained deeply in motivational interviewing, which is based on the stages of change, because I worked for a substance use program. And but I remember the whole time I had a slight, like, isn't this motivational interviewing, or is this, seems so similar? And then you get into the whole complex psychological flexibility and the hexaplex. But I do think it's an interesting thing. And I was thinking about what Cabot said of people needing, like as a facilitator, needing to have all these various skills. And then Paul, your desire to create, like, what's the one question? And the first thing that came to my mind is this is not a fast process. It's a continuous. So if there is always, I think, in our culture right now, to make the temptation to make something easy for people to learn, or for something to be simplified. And to me, groups are complex, individuals are complex, and that's the whole thing, is that we are talking about, can we slow people down to see the depth and complexity in even the simplest decision that they have when sitting in a room of, do I want to belong to this group or do I not? And if I want to belong to this group, what could get in the way of me belonging? And do I want to accomplish what this group wants to accomplish? And what will get me in the way of me being a partner in the group that we can, fulfill that accomplishment. So I don't know. I think it's okay to not, I think there's a balance, is what I'm saying, Paul, is I work so hard to slow people down. And I think that's so important, that we, yes, make it easy, but also, and I think the simplicity is just in language, to tell you the truth. Like I said, I don't use the word pro-social because nobody except for these prevention specialists know what it is, because pro-social is in public health all the time, right? But if I'm working with a conservation group, I just talk about belonging and accomplishments, and then they get it. Not to be, and I know this is just my little perspective, but I guess yeah. Anyway, for
Thanks,
whatever
Rach.
that's worth.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it.